So, there are worse ways to start a first live podcast, my friend. Manchester United 3, Fulham 2. And for those of you joining us for the first time, I am, of course, Shaun Connolly from the Theatre of Red. My good friend here, Mr. Phil Brown from Beyond the Pitch. There is much to digest from that particular fixture, Phil. But before you start getting into the real nitty gritty of it, what's the immediate emotions following the final whistle?
The emotions at 3-2 are very different than what they would have been if United had won that game 2-1.
Mm.
2-1 when United conceded that penalty, it takes a gloss of it. You wanted a clean sheet. You wanted it to be comfortable. You wanted there to be a bit of a cushion. Go 2-1, sort of feeling differently of what I felt at 2-0. 2 each, you're going, this is the Manchester United that we were hoping we weren't going to see anymore. And then bang, 3-2. Sesko could have scored to make it 3-0, but I think he gets so much more out of a 3-2 winning goal than what he would have got at 3-0. So I think Carrick got rewarded. He brings Sesko on at 2-0, ended up needing him, and he got rewarded for that bravery.
I think it's a pretty fair synopsis. We spoke before the game, and I've had various conversations with many people. What we wanted to see from Manchester United today was something that we have not seen from Manchester United sides in so many seasons. We become accustomed to even a poor Manchester United side going and beating somebody like Manchester City, Liverpool, Chelsea, Arsenal, and then ultimately falling flat a couple of days later against a side that you would be expecting them to beat. So I think an awful lot of people coming into this game today, even though they would recognise the fact that Fulham are a very challenging side, their position in the table highlighted this. They came into the game in seventh place. But you wanted to see something from this side. You wanted to see a performance that could really reflect what should be the perennial differences in these two teams. Go out, command the football, dominate proceedings, fashion opportunities against a side that was going to sit deep, and then ultimately get 3 points and pull in something like 2-3 nil lead. Now, I think maybe it was slightly oversighted or understated in terms of what Fulham are actually capable of doing, Phil, because regardless of what they are or what they were perceived to be before this game, as I said, this was a side sitting in seventh place before a ball was kicked today. They did not come to play second fiddle to Michael Carrick's Manchester United today. They came and they figured that they had an opportunity to get a share of the spoils or to get all 3 points. And you could see that. I think Manchester United started very, very well today, particularly with something that we'll obviously entertain later. We will get to regarding what occurred before kickoff, because that can set a bit of a tempestuous mood inside the ground based on proceedings outside and inside. But I think United started brightly. They went into the game with an attack set of a mindset. Yeah. Ahmad tested the keeper within 4 or 5 minutes. And I thought that was going to set the tone for what was going to be not necessarily a comfortable evening, but an evening that we could really get behind and you could start building up a few goals. Ultimately, Fulham came back and it made it a rather entertaining spectacle. And I think that's probably where it veers towards what you're saying. If that game finishes 2-1, then you're looking at it and maybe looking at more of the downsides rather than the upsides. But if we look at the first half as a whole, Phil, before you start dissecting everything, it was largely routine, wasn't it? Manchester United had a lot of attacking intent. They looked pretty good in their transitions. Fulham had marginally more of the football without actually really threatening all that much in the final third. But in the context of going 1-0 up against a dangerous side, could we have asked for much more in that 45 minutes after what happened before kickoff? Your audio's not coming through, buddy.
Oh, sorry. You always want these comfortable wins where you have breathing space and where you have routine victories and where it looks like United are enjoying themselves playing football. But this so rarely happens now at the top level. I mean, you look at the Premier League results. Very rarely do you see anyone stroll through a game, even Arsenal. The top teams, every once in a while, you'll see City have a comfortable win, but it's a rare occasion. And look, if Fulham had won today, they'd have been within a point of United. And they're a good side. I was reading a stat. Forgive me if used stats loosely in the past, so I might be getting this wrong.
Go on, have
But
a
it was
go.
there was it came here a stat that came up on the screen early in the game that showed the form over the last 7 games, and Fulham were second in the Premier League for form in the last 7 games. I would imagine United have to be up there on that form chart as well, because listening to, I think I mentioned this on last week's podcast, to talk to the Devils, we're mentioning that United have the longest unbeaten run in the Premier League, 7 games now. So United were in good form, Fulham were in good form. It was a tough game. Well, that game asked different questions of Michael Carrick that were not going to be asked against Arsenal and against City. You're going to have to win the game a different way. And what I like about how this game is finished, how the game finished last week, United at 2-8 last week, surrender momentum. The most probabilistic outcome at that point is Arsenal get a third. And that's primarily what we've seen with most United teams, is the third comes. They wrestled back momentum, won the game 3-2. At 2 each, that's asking different questions than what you get asked if United win that game 2-0 or 2-1. Now it's about, what are you going to do? Is muscle memory going to keep you in this hole that you've not been able to climb out of in the past? If United draw that game, all the Carrick momentum is gone. It's a negative headline. It's negative press. It's about the last 10 minutes of the game. Instead, they end up winning the game 3-2. I think they've responded with question marks over their character. And how do you dig yourself out of holes? This United team's going to find themselves in holes. I wish we could have had Cunha back on the pitch, because Cunha is very, very important when you're trying to hold on to a lead. But you have to say, look, Shaun, it's been 3 games. United have scored 8 goals in those 3 games. And they've played very, very good teams, and they've won 3 in a row. Amorim only managed that once.
There's a lot to be said about the joy you take from winning a football game, and perspective that comes from that, Phil. I'm going to draw back on something you said for a second time when you were mentioning when it was 2-1, if that game had finished 2-1. I am sitting in my office here with a pretty bunged up knee. It's been at me for quite some time now, so I wasn't able to travel so much today. So I had to watch the game and listen to some of the audios that I don't normally get in real time. And at 2-1, when Nazir Mazraoui came onto the field, there was a suggestion that United are going to sit back, they're going to try and hold on for what they have, and it could be dangerous, allowing pressure to build. Had that third goal not gone in, then there would have been serious questions, not only about the mental fragility of this team, but also with the tactical decision making of a man that for the first real time he encountered a bit of issues. But we saw another string to his bow today, Phil. And this is something that we discussed last week, how, what are you looking at, a 17-game period for Michael Carrick? It's completely preposterous to think that he could go out and win every single one of those games. But he's had 3, he's won 3. He's been asked questions in all of them. Well, maybe not so much against City. I think we could throw that in there. He wasn't asked too many questions there. But he's been asked questions and he's answered those questions. And,
I think he was asked questions against City, Shaun. I just think he answered them so emphatically that they didn't look like questions. I think that with, you can make a mistake of looking too far in the future. The present moment is what we should enjoy. United won today. 3 games in a row. We play Spurs next, very winnable game. But you'll see this a lot of people, I'm not celebrating winning against Spurs or whatever because this is going to happen. I don't understand those people that postpone misery or postpone celebration because you anticipate misery. Like you enjoy the present moment. All you could say is United have won 3 games. Who knows what happens going forward? No United fan needs to be told about this. To me, I think Michael Carrick just has to win his next game of football, and then his next game of football, and then we'll see what that takes us. But that it's enormous pressure to put on him to say, okay, could we qualify for a Champions League? Villa lost today. Could we finish third? We were just hoping that United wouldn't lose any of the next 2 games when he got appointed because they looked a nightmare. We're sitting on 3 wins, which was unthinkable, and I think that for Carrick, his body of work of what he's accomplished so far is all that should matter. Not to me what he could achieve; it's what he has done because who knows what lies ahead. Um, I was delighted with how they performed. I'm going to let my dog in. Go ahead, man. I can hear you. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Well, look, the performance fantastic because obviously you've scored three. You've showed grit, you've showed commitment and fight until the final whistle, and ultimately got 3 points. But the main thing to take from this, throughout the last five fixtures in the Premier League, you've had three with Carrick, one with Fletcher, one with Ruben Amram. United are top of the form charts over the last five games with 11 points from five fixtures, Phil. So realistically, even though I'm sitting here talking to a chair, I can only hope you can hear me. There we
I'm
go.
the top of the what chart? Top
they're
of the
top
pot
of
chart?
they're top of the form charts over the last five games. You know, they picked up 11 points from the last five fixtures, scored 11 goals, conceded seven.
Admitted
And
the chair's better informed than me.
I beg your pardon.
Admitted the chair's better to talk to than me.
But you know, we saw another thing that we cannot disregard in this during what now is the farewell campaign for Casemiro. Once again stepping up, Phil. Just what has become a trademark header. His fifth goal of the Premier League campaign as well for a guy who's 33 years of age and seemingly past it, if you listen to what some pundits would say. And then Team Cunha up for the second goal. You know, he seems to be playing with this freedom and this frivolous nature of midfield camaraderie and maestro of everything that we have come to know from a player who's collected five Champions Leagues.
Mm-hmm.
I know that it is the twilight of his Manchester United career, but he seems absolutely hell bent on dragging this team in every way he can back into the top four and a return to Champions League football before he leaves. Just how impressed were you with him again today, Phil?
I mean, sure, just you talking about a guy that a year ago everyone was certain
Hmm.
that his legs were gone. The infamous "you have to leave the football before the football leaves you" comment. Um, I've said this many times. This is a guy that's had to deal with the new owners constantly using his signing as an example of bad business. I think that's terrible from United. This is a guy that's got five Champions Leagues. Not just what he's done on the pitch. It's never do you hear an issue with him off the pitch. You don't hear about him causing controversy, or you don't see him in newspapers. You don't see him out. His leadership, his attitude, and then you watch him celebrating with Carrick. You watch how much these games mean to him. That guy has come to Manchester United, didn't use United as a retirement home, exceptionally well compensated, of course, but he showed up every single week. This is a guy I remember when Ten Hag played him at centre half against Arsenal and lost his place in the Brazil team. He was the Brazil captain, didn't throw the toys out of the pram, buckled down, got himself back in the team. When Amorim took over, wasn't first choice, gets himself back in the team. And now you're talking about a player where there's such a noticeable difference when he comes off the pitch than when he's on it. United aren't good enough to take him out of games and replace him like for like, but he doesn't have obviously the legs to do it. I listened to Pep Guardiola talk about Bernardo Silva and how exhausted he is and how he needs a rest and doesn't have the legs. It has to be the same for Casemiro. That he isn't going to be here next season. So wherever United finish, he's now going to be able to bask in that glory. But nonetheless, he's playing like he's going to be here for the next 5 years.
As you said before, planting those trees that he's never going to see the shade of, you know,
Yes.
and there's so much to admire about the character of that. I mean, I thought I loved the man, but my love has grown to an entire new level over what I've seen. You know, it's if only there was more midfield generals like him coming through. And, you know, in fairness, Kobbie Mainoo, again, another very, very disciplined display at the heart of midfield. It goes without saying, you know,
Mm-hmm.
what we attributed so much over the last year or a bit in his introduction into the football team was just how graceful he was in the football. You know, so much technical ability. And often it led to the suggestion, and I'll say that I even had this conversation myself about is he more suited to a higher lying position in that sort of 10, if you will, a
Yeah.
more creative avenue that is where you'll best see him. But we've again seen yet another display where he's marauding forward and backwards, covering every blade of grass, winning very difficult battles. And there were several occasions during that game where he took on Alex Iwobi. And that is not a difficult task, or that's not an easy task because
Mm-hmm.
Iwobi's a big guy. He's a very strong, combative He's just a good player, and Cobby did not look out of place against him. You're right to make reference to what you said about replacing like for like, because Manuel Ugarte, again he came onto the field, and you can see the difference in quality and composure in the field when you're missing out on Casemiro. But I do think that Manu again stood up and said, I do have the capabilities to marshal a two-man midfield. And it really does open the door for whoever it is the club can manage to bring in to partner him for the foreseeable future, doesn't it?
It's just bizarre to me, Shaun, that if you look at United's last two managers, keeping Ten Hag would have cost United a mad. If I'm watching a mad play for someone else and doing what he does for United every week is excruciating. I'm looking and going, what were United thinking? Right? And this manager, Ruben Amorim, I hate to keep harping back to him. Eventually, we'll move on where he's not part of a discussion, but he's still particularly relevant, given that it was such a recent event, his dismissal, and of course because of such of the contrast between what we had before and what we have now. It just is puzzling to me how you can't fit Cobby Mainoo into whatever you're trying to do. And that's on lots of managers come in, like players, dislike players, doesn't make sense to fans, and that's forgivable if in return you're providing something, a winning system, a winning mentality, something that makes that sacrifice worth it. We never got that, and I never want to see a manager sacked, and I don't believe in bogeyman. I don't believe that in today's world a manager feels on their own. There are obviously larger systemic issues, but I'm so glad you did not lose Cobby Mainoo, because he has a technique to play multiple different positions in midfield, and I would have been devastated if we'd lost him. I think he was exceptional today. I think he was very, very good against Arsenal. I think he was very good against City. What I worry about with Manu is the load management. When you have a player that doesn't play a nice play in multiple games, as we've seen with Dorgu, once you change the load management, you put players under pressure of injuries, and Cabby's had quite a few. But it just is baffling to me, Shaun, how you can exclude Cobby Mainoo and whatever you're trying to do.
I think that probably mirrors an awful lot of people's thought process at this time. But the one thing that I will say about the load management, how often have we seen a Manchester United playing one game a week? You're playing one game of Saturday or Sunday, and then you've got a week to recover. So I think that will stand him. And ultimately, the outcome of this season and the endurance and the conditioning that he's going to pick up through these games when he has got ample recovery time, I think that's going to stand to him huge. Now, you mentioned Ruben Amorim and not wanting to track back to him, that there's essentially several mitigating factors that can fall foul on any manager. It's not necessarily just the thought process of him, the decision making that he has, but there's variables behind the scenes. Obviously, I want to stay speaking about the game because we've not really got into the second half period of it. But I think it's fitting when you're talking about those variables and mentioning the manager to mention obviously what occurred beforehand with the 1958, the planned protest. We saw a very, very large contingent, going through two different meeting points to set forward the tone that has been set across throughout the 1958 and the run up to this, that the protest was obviously aimed towards the Glazers, as it always has been. But on this particular occasion, Ineos and Jim Radcliffe was also being included, targeting everything from inept decision-making to poor financial costings to the treatment of working class supporters, down to looking at the likes of the retaining Eric Ten Hag, backing him, then sacking him, bringing in Ruben Amorim, getting rid of Dan Ashworth, getting rid of Ruben Amorim, the amount of compensation that has gone on all three of those, while at the same time, genuine 9-to-5 working class Mancunians are losing their jobs. And then obviously it extends then onto the treatment of supporters with ticket allocation, with what we're seeing with away standards. And ultimately that's coming to the fore outside the ground today with Jim Radcliffe and with Ineos being added into the same token category as the Glazers. They saw quite a turnout today. It was covered across widespread media outlets, and it's something that we discussed last week. But where do you stand now today, having seen what you saw from the pictures? Obviously, you're your geographical location, you're across the water with that. But from what you saw today, Phil, how are you believing that the club is standing towards Ineos, Jim Radcliffe, being coupled in with the Glazers?
Sean, if you are going to buy a business or you're going to do a startup or any endeavor in life, the first and most important question you have to answer to yourself: what does success look like? What is the definition of success? Now, if you sat in a room with the Glazers and asked that question, you're going to get an answer on a balance sheet. We think we'd agree on that, right? If you ask Jim Ratcliffe that question, which he was many times during the strategic review, you're going to get a football answer. Immediately, we have a problem. When we talk about cultural reset and everything else, culture is not just some serendipitous accident. Culture is a derivative of first principle. So when you have a problem between what is first principle, is it football success or profit? Whoever wins that fight, everything else is a derivative of. Everything is a casualty of. Right now, that is profit. That is financial. If Pep Guardiola goes to Man City and says, "Hey, I need to spend 180 million in January so that we can qualify for the or win the Premier League," he gets 180 million. If you go and ask Jim Ratcliffe, say, "Hey, I need 60 million for a midfielder to get us in the Champions League," Jim Ratcliffe should be very, um, very open and to that particular request. If you ask that question to the Glazers, you're going to get the following calculus: 60 million for a midfielder. We get 40 million prize money for qualifying for the Champions League. Nah, we're not going to do that because that's a net loss. I don't care if you qualify. Why would I give you 60 million to qualify for something that generates 40 million? Obviously, I'm loosely using figures here to make a point, but this is what I mean about everything's a casualty to that. Then you calibrate your incentive program to achieve what you prioritize. And when you do stuff like that, rapacious owners hate collective bonuses. They hate it. They hate bonuses for team because they want to be able to apply statistical value to each and every person based on what they bring in. So then they compete against each other. So now you have no consensus. Now you have what you have at United, where you have every man for himself, where there is no culture, where it's about personal gain. And that type of system selects for a certain type of personality. Just like when you're building a football system on the pitch, you recruit people with that temperament and personality and you get what you have. This is all a derivative of the priorities of the owner. I don't know how Ineos and the Glazers marry these two ideologies, which they're compatible to a point, but once it gets to the point where Pep Guardiola gets a yes, United managers get a no, that is where they're not compatible. And I don't see how this is sustainable. I don't see how you can have two owners with very different definitions of success in a business because it just doesn't work.
Well, then, is it fair to look at the situation as much open book as you possibly can? Because I think that there's an awful lot of supporters that understand a certain point of where we are in this ownership without actually understanding the full embroiled calculus of everything. What is Ineos responsible for at this football club? Ineos is responsible for the sporting department, for making sporting decisions, for making these cost cutting measures that we've seen with redundancies, for transfer business, and for delegating, we'll say, the finances that come off the success of the football team back into the club. Ineos is not responsible for the debt. Ineos is not responsible for ownership decisions. So realistically, you have to look at what exactly it is Ineos are capable of achieving at this football club, Phil. So, in the current measure, with what they're there, and now just let me clarify to anyone listening who thinks this might be some sort of a stance of going off towards defense of Ineos. That's not what I'm doing here. I'm not defending, nor am I beating anybody. I'm just simply trying to look at the facts, and the facts that we know are that Ineos has a certain amount of power, but their hands are being held behind their back in the same vein. You know, If it's a situation that you're trying to look at the best measure that can come out of this particular agreement that you're referencing, Phil, it doesn't really make sense. The best course of action is that there's 100% removal of the Glazers. And anybody can stand by that. Now, what the 1958 is coming out and saying is that if that was to be the situation and it turned out that Radcliffe and Ineos were the ones that were going to come in and actually complete that purchase, the 58 would be utterly terrified by that, because the prospect of him coming in and having full control just, it terrifies them. They don't feel that they have any confidence in any way, shape, or form of what it is he's doing, Phil. And
Okay. To me,
you want
some of
to
them are
interject?
different.
Okay.
To me, you can have ownership that is predatory, that sole purpose is to use Manchester United as a vehicle for personal enrichment. That is absolutely unacceptable, and regulation should not allow that. If, on the other hand, you're protesting owners who are making mistakes trying to get things right, I don't think you can ask for their removal. I think that Ineos, you're going to make mistakes in the beginning. That's just a fact of life, right? So you're going to get Dan Ashworth. You're going to get this type of tumultuous tenure in the beginning. You're not going to do it perfectly. Recruiting for people that work in a sporting department, to be cohesive with your manager, your coach, and the play, that takes time. And so, to me, making mistakes trying to get things right is forgivable, because the Glazers were never trying to really get things right. So, if Ineos come in and invest billions and billions, they're trying to hire the best people possible, but it's mistakes are happening. I think that you have a right to expect competent ownership, but I don't think you can protest uh, owners that are trying to do the right thing.
So from here, just let me just add something to what you're saying, okay? And I don't mean to interrupt you. I never will. But
Yeah, mate, yes, all right.
you have the situation right now where it's almost been viewed upon that the mistakes that have been made should not have been made if we are to be the competent football club that we are moving forward. So you have to ask the question: is it a fair point that Jim Radcliffe was added to today's protests on the basis that he wasn't able to overturn 21 years of mismanagement in 2 years?
Yeah.
And that's the question, and that's the pragmatic question that needs to be asked.
And see, this is to me where you have to really refine the point. What exactly are you protesting? It's very hard to get ownership where it's flawless ownership, where you're going to just win leagues recursively, and it's very, very difficult to do that. And it's not like United are spoiled for choice outside of Jim Ratcliffe. You certainly have a right to expect a certain candor and decorum in how you run the football club that's commensurate with its culture, right? You shouldn't be the way United laid off people. Dan Ashworth was a big opponent to this when he was right. Dan Ashworth, over the course of time, has proven to be correct. I don't think you should treat people that way. I think that some of the decisions that were made were all cost, no benefit. I think that there's certain ways, football clubs are a business when they start making money, but they're not when they lose money, because they privatize the gains and publicize losses, right? So they want it both ways, but they can't have it both ways. I think that there's no question any of us need to be much more fan aligned than what they've been. They need to be much more considerate of fans, but I don't think that you can protest their intentions. To me, they want a football club that's successful. That's the first time we've had owners at this football club that has had that stated goal, stated definition of success, probably since JP McManus and Magnan.
Yeah, well, at this point in the conversation that we're having, it's a dangerous conversation with so much of the fan base, because obviously, as we know, the Manchester United fan base is one of the most fractured that you're going to get in football.
Yes.
And that goes without saying. It's easier to name the days that you don't have some sort of social discomfort between various groups within the supporter base than without. But the question that was posed to me by several friends outside of a working perspective is, would I class Ineos and the Glazers in the same conversation? And even though I would never try to just give them a pardon on the numerous errors that they've made, because they should be held up on those errors. There is notable errors, and as a very proud socialist and a working class individual myself, I'm very much on the side of working class people. So it pains me terribly to see people being affected financially, the working class people. At the same time, do I think it is an appropriate argument or a point to use in a debate to say, well, I don't like the platform of work that they're actually applying in France, and I don't think that they're the best thing in moving forward when I cannot offer a suitable alternative? And that's the thing that worries me about an awful lot of arguments and debates that occur online about this. They just there's a blanket category that they're in the same mold as the Glazers. When people choose to ignore the fact that money is being input directly out of Radcliffe's pocket, there is infrastructure development, there is a plan for further infrastructure development. It would appear as though there is an improved transfer philosophy with what we're seeing at the football club. And there is at least minute attempts to alleviate this toxic culture that exists within the dressing room and the football club. It's very difficult to state that online, Phil, without somebody accusing you of being a Glazer apologist or of trying to really publicize toxic positivity. But I would like to hope that that's not the way I'm coming across and trying to stress this to you right now, though, is it?
No, what you're seeing here, Sean, is two completely different attitudes to sport.
Mm,
American attitudes to sport and the profit angle in sports is much more transactional, right? So they have a top-down approach in America to where we see this with the World Cup, for example, where it's about maximizing revenue of the event. Now you have two ways you can do this. You can have affordable access for grassroots fans because you want to use these events to grow the sport organically from the ground up. If you want to use it as an opportunity to maximize profit as a commercial entity and do it top down, then you're able to move franchises because they're not rooted in their communities. They've no identity. They're businesses, right? So when you speak to Americans about the transactional nature of the Glazers, they are perplexed that we expected anything different or we should expect anything different because the axiom that is used here in sport is if in business and pretty much everything is if it makes dollars and cents, it makes sense. But I don't agree with that. And the problem with that is you end up with things like the Super League where they want to remove jeopardy and guaranteed revenue no matter how you perform. Now, if you had a situation where finishing last guaranteed you the most revenue, I believe that would be a Glazers target. And they don't have anything that can't be commoditized and sold has really no value to them. So everything has a financial appraised value to it. If you're talking about the infrastructure and stuff, they're not interested in the infrastructure. They see in it its value and its brand. So that's why you don't get infrastructure investment. So when you have someone like Jim Ratcliffe, who don't get me wrong, is a rentier capitalist like the Glazers, so
mm-hmm.
not turning around and saying that he's Mr. Benevolent, but Ratcliffe sort of understands the difference and why clubs belong to their communities and why you have to have pricing that isn't based on supply and demand. It's based on acknowledging their core loyal support, giving them affordable access to games, and making sure there's a healthy balance between revenue that's a derivative of your success or success that you know success that it has a secondary value to profit. And I think that this is what I mean. It's just a clash in attitudes towards sport and what sports responsibility is to its supporters.
Yeah, well, I mean, the fundamental thing to take into consideration here is the decision that was made in 2005 that there
Of course.
was passed for the Glazers to purchase this club with a leverage takeover. I mean, the fact that today is no longer legal to complete this particular purchase, tells you all you need to know about that. And as long as that entity is
I'm
involved
not
with the
impressed
football
by
club,
that, mate. I'll be honest.
you're not impressed by what?
The fact that it's not illegal, it should have been illegal in 2005. It was the most
Of course, it
obvious
should
thing
have
in
been.
the world, and doing it retroactively to me is cowardice.
Yeah, well, of course it is. But I mean, like,
Yeah, I
you
agree.
you 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 can see the continued cowardice in failure to act on Manchester City's complete lack of acknowledgement for the rules and how they're able to disrepute them so easily, and it's a common occurrence. You know, it's what's good for some is not so good for others, and realistically speaking, Manchester United are going to continue having the same perennial issues as long as those Americans stay involved with this football club. And now we're just at this almost this breaking point after close to 2 years with Radcliffe and with Ineos, that they're just going to be categorized in the same vein because ultimately they're the ones that have taken up the mantle of the public abuse that used to be shouldered upon the Glazers. They're able to they're just moving further back while Ineos are coming more into the public light, and they're the ones that are taking more of the blunt. It was always going to be like this. It was one of the things I discussed when they first came into the football club, that it's an ideal situation for the Glazers, and it continues to do so. You know, the fact of the matter is that after this protest today, the vast majority of it will not find its way to the Glazers in America. They'll only hear what they want to hear, and they'll hear no more about it. And it's not that I'm saying protests are invaluable, are not worthwhile. They're an invaluable resource, and the supporters should get forward. I've been involved in plenty of these protests myself. It's today, I'm not sure where we stand, and I would like to believe that it can have a positive impact on the supporter base in moving forward. Yet, despite what some would have you believe, I've just seen it provide a little bit more of a fracture, at least in the social aspect, than was probably intended before it began, Phil.
You know, Sean, I'm sitting here in Los Angeles, and for me, I don't believe I have the right to tell anyone who's a match going fan how to protest, what to protest, when to protest. I mean, and I don't believe if one person turns up to protest, I don't believe that person should be criticized for the protest. It should be the people that don't turn up, should be the ones
Hmm.
criticized. And the fan groups have very, very legitimate and very real substantive points that affect them. And Protests are really hard. They need to build momentum. They certainly work in the sense that you know sponsors now are much more accessible because of the internet. So these are a bad look for United in terms of their marketing, in terms of their advertising, in terms of their pursuit of
Hmm.
sponsors. No one wants this. So they're not particularly they're certainly not something that United are oblivious to. And when they're done properly and effectively, they stop the Super League. So I can understand fans, sentiment right now, and every single concession that's been given to fans came about as a result of civil disobedience, of the threat of fan, retaliation. That's a very real thing for United, and I, I, I am concerned about certain things, certain decisions that football in general is making. I think it's really important collectively that fans understand the value of their voice.
Oh, likewise, and but you see this as well. This extends just the physical protest that was at the ground today, because so much of the message that was being put out from the 58 beforehand was that they acknowledged there were so many people who wouldn't have the ability to have boots on ground today, just like you with your geographical location, and it was really emphasized of the importance of engaging in an online protest as well, because as you said, there's so many different avenues that this can affect. It has a very real meaning. And look, there's going to be more in moving forward, Phil, and I welcome each and every single one of them. I just hope that there can be a shared belief amongst the fan base as to what it is we should be targeting and moving forward, and the ultimate benefits that football will have, not just Manchester United. And go on.
So I was going to say this is where it's really important you finesse and refine the point. Like I've never been one that believed that part of the protest should be who United are signing and who they're not signing, because that to me is so easy to attack. Like,
Hmm.
it should be about functional, systematic things that are a threat to the club's future and the club's well-being, and those are legitimate points that are hard to repudiate. But I I think it's very very hard to use the fact of Dan Ashworth's dismissal or mistakes like that as part of your opposition to the owners. If they're making serious, egregious mistakes that are, a result of bad intentions, and then I think yes, you're absolutely right that that should be part of your protest. But it's hard to demand owners to get everything right.
Yeah, true words, and there's no point in trying to add to them because ultimately, when all is said and done this evening, the vast majority of the fan base is going to be reflecting on another 3 points, as we began discussing with, and we discussed in great detail about the first half, Phil, and the second half saw that rousing comeback and somewhat maybe supplied a little bit of a tonic to the supporter base that there is at least a group of players who are willing to fight for the badge until the final whistle. That's something that we haven't been able to reflect upon for many, many seasons. So we now see a side that has climbed back into the fourth, 5 points behind Aston Villa. We've seen further standout performances from the likes of Casemiro and Kobbie Mainoo, as we suggested, but also again from Matthias Cunha coming in from the start. Brian Mbumo didn't get on the score sheet today, Phil, but again, it was another fantastic performance from him. Bruno Fernandes once more orchestrated absolutely everything and was crucial in both goals, especially with the one for Sesko at the very end. And ultimately, Carrick and Steve Holland and all of that coaching staff are the brainchild behind a trio of consecutive victories that sets us up finally for the arrival of Spurs next weekend to put further pressure on that third place and to continue with the momentum that's happening within the football team. So, from a footballing perspective, outside of what we're seeing on the field and any possible movement that can occur on transfer deadline day tomorrow, it looks pretty good.
I was thinking about that Martinez interview on Friday when he said that Carrick had touched his heart. And I think that was couched as a bit of a criticism of what they'd had before. If you remember when Solskjaer got the job, most of the players preferred Carrick. I definitely think that these wins are a derivative of things that Carrick has done specifically. They're not just new manager vibes. They're not just, a result of a temporary high, a temporary lift. I think that these are causal of decisions that he's making. And we've just sat here and talked about Ineos's failures, Sean. But what about their successes? Today, Cunha and Sesko score. Right? The signings that they made over the summer, the signings that they made last January, they signed Dorgu and Heaven last January. We'd now sit and say unequivocally they've been a success. The players they signed in the summer, and Bumo's been a resounding success. Cunha, has been to me a fantastic player. Sesko now scoring consistently in games, scoring a vital goal today. So I think that it's important also to acknowledge some of the things they've got right.
It's not only those who scored the goals as well. St. Lamans was crucial on several occasions today as well in preventing them.
And again, a bit dodgy with the stats, forgive me. But I think since Lamans has signed, United have lost the fewest amount of games in the Premier League of all the teams. So it's the draws that have done United in. The recruitment has been, none of those players are going to need to be replaced this summer. They're players that you can now build on. And I think they have to be given credit because United have a goal threat in them, which they haven't had for years. They have a very goal threat. And each one of those players has made United better. And I think they deserve credit for that recruitment.
Yeah, and you're not going to get anything against that from me. These are logical observations. You can be angry about various different constraints within the football club, but there's nothing wrong with standing up and recognizing what's right in front of you. And, it's something I want to put to you. It's something I've considered. We are looking at the end of the transfer window coming tomorrow. And what we hear is going to be quite an ambitious summer period for the football club.
Mm-hmm.
Someone put it to me in the last couple of days that this Manchester United is one two midfield signings and a fullback away from actually competing on all fronts competitively. Would you go along with that, or do you think that there's more to add into this team?
I don't know because it's hard to scale the loss of Casemiro and his leadership. We still have to deal with the Maguire issue, so it all depends on what United lose this summer.
Mm.
If you're asking me that question right now, I mean it's easy to say that, but we don't know, because new problems will develop when you solve current issues. That's fluid, so you're going to have constantly changing circumstances and challenges, and no one is perfect. You look at City and you look at Arsenal. I mean, I think Roy Keane said this would be the worst champions ever, but this is the biggest problem in football: is it's so hard now to saying outstanding individuals that are so obviously better than everyone else that make your team that much better, because there's just very little variation between players, and quality difference. So certainly would make United a lot better, but it's really difficult to gauge the gap between United, City, and Arsenal, because you can't base that on what you've seen before with United, and you can't base it on what you're seeing right now, because this will eventually level out. So I don't know what United's level is, but um, I think that obviously they need to tighten up defensively. If they let Maguire go, they're going to have to get someone of similar stature. I would worry about that loss of leadership. You see today what happens when Casemiro comes off. So it's not just about getting Baleba and Anderson, it's about getting players that bring you leadership qualities and composure in key moments.
Yeah, absolutely. But it does stand the question. Like the question is there that there is variables that need to be considered about how this squad can react to multiple competitions, midweek football, not as much
Yes.
time to prepare. But then at the same time, when you bring in a certain caliber of footballer, it can have a tremendous effect on the rest of the team. I don't think anybody that they're going to bring in midfield is going to be able to replicate what Casemiro can bring to that dressing room, the experience he has, and the ultimate quality, and the way that young lads will look at him and say, okay, well, I want to impress him, because that's always going to stand there. And that obviously begs the question about Harry Maguire and whether or not he's going to stay, because again, he was fantastic again today. He's having this redemption arc that he has had over the last year or so has just been a joy to watch, particularly after the amount of public abuse that he received.
Mhm.
But I can't help but feel that what we're looking at right now is the framework to set solid foundations for something positive and moving forward, because so many of those footballers that you've mentioned, they're new to the football club. They're still trying to find their way in the Northwest. And when you're talking about attacking pedigree like Imbumo, Sesko, Cunha, even if you just leave Sesko out for a moment because he came from a different division, but you're talking about the likes of Premier League proven footballers
Mhm.
that are just looking at the light of the peak of their days. And if you can add in players like Elliot Anderson, Carlos Baleba, Adam Wharton, whoever they may be, and they can buy into the fundamental principles that Manchester United deserve to be operating and playing at a different level, then I think there's every reason for Manchester United's fans to get giddy. I'm not saying that this team is tailor made to go off and compete and actually transition to achieving Project 150 that Omar Barada has laid out. But if you get the right pieces, and it's like you said last week when we were speaking, you put square pegs in square holes,
Mhm.
then all of a sudden, what looks like it's a miraculous foundation from an innovative coaching staff is actually just really talented footballers playing with confidence, belief, and momentum, because they've been deployed to do what they were brought to the football club to do in the first place, Phil.
Of course, 100%. And, you know, Carrick knows how to spot a midfielder. It's also about bringing the right characteristics. I think if you look at what Anthony Gordon said last week before the PSG game, about, or was he might have been after,
It was
about,
before it, yeah.
yeah, and he emphasized about how different the athletic demands are in the Premier League versus Champions League. And high Champions League is much more technical. In Premier League, it's much more physical, it's much more athletic. So having Premier League experience, having a body that's adjusted to playing in the Premier League, that's built to survive in the Premier League, is a massive advantage. Because there is definitely a different type of physical athletic demand on you in the Premier League. So I think it's getting harder and harder to bring young midfielders in from abroad. I mean, Florian Wirtz is obviously a very good footballer, but he physically just looks miles off it. I mean, I even saw at times Bruno Fernandes today getting out muscled in midfield. He has the technique to get away with it, but you couldn't have three midfielders that have no physical presence. So I think the Premier League ready is probably more relevant today than at any other time. So I think Baleba and Anderson would be two players that would instantly fit in. I would want to see those. I was reading that Anderson would wait till after the World Cup. That would make me nervous. If he's going to wait till after the World Cup, it's only worth doing if United have solid guarantees that he'll sign after the World Cup. You don't want to try to go out and get your backup plan after that. Doesn't leave you much time. So hopefully these are things that United have done, dusted before the World Cup.
Oh, absolutely. You know, in an ideal world, they'll have the business done and dusted nice and early so as they can start planning for a pre-season that includes all of
Mm.
their desired targets. There's one thing I want to get your opinion on. It's something I've been discussing with mates recently. There's so much conversation about how the quality in the Premier League has dropped, that we're no longer near what we used to see in terms of Premier League football.
Mm.
But when you look at the Champions League and you see four of those English sides in the top six, you see Newcastle going to PSG and getting a credible draw, and they could have won. I think it's more so a trademark of where football is now.
Yeah, of course.
And I don't think it's anything got to do with the fact that it's a poor Premier League. I think the Premier League is still, without question, the most competitive division in club football, Phil. And we're seeing that on the continent when you're seeing these football clubs going out and playing against the best in Bundesliga, Serie A, and La Liga.
If a youth coach at under five, under six, under seven, under eight doesn't do their job right, the pro coach doesn't get the player. Right. So in some sense, the coaches that coach at grassroots level are more important than the coaches at the very top, because if they do their job wrong, it goes wrong all the way down the line. But I see occasionally on my timeline on Twitter, people uploading clips of an under 12 team passing the ball 26 times before they put the ball in the net, as if that's something to be impressed by, which is just total bullshit. First of all, these teams are not going to be together for more than a year, right? Because if you're progressing up the ladder at youth level, you shouldn't be, right? You should be moving on and moving on. What's going to happen now? I mean, that looks great, but if these players have no individual ability, so what? This team at under 12 wins, but this kid 2 years from now is going to drop out because he doesn't know how to beat a player. Like, that's not your job at this level, to get a fantastically performing team. It's to improve players individually. Now, yes, of course, if your team wins, great. But, your responsibility as a coach, a youth coach, is to develop players, not teams. So the emphasis has always been on this, ticky-tacky, pass, 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 pass. I see one of the worst, perfidious contaminants in youth football is the pro game. To me, youth football is about establishing technique, fundamentals, executing them in games later. We see kids playing games that don't know how to trap football. I don't understand that personally, but this is a consequence of coaching individual creativity, individual, brilliance out of players, and commoditizing everything, where young kids are now learning solely based on a critiqued environment, where they're going to training. Everything's about stop, start, stop, start, stop, start. They do this, don't do that, do this, do that, don't do this, do this. And trying to develop by playing competitive games. Worst thing you can do. Kids don't touch the ball enough in competitive games. But this feeds parents' egos, of course. So now what do we have? Complete homogeneity, players that all look the same. So there isn't the individual quality to go out and buy anymore.
Yeah, it's a fair point. And obviously, as two Paddies discussing Manchester United here as we are, we can see all the influx of money that's gone into through the FAI to actually affect grassroots game here, because that's ultimately what's suffered for so long. And it's a planned project that you start seeing the benefits in 15 years' time. And ultimately, that is what has deviated from what we see in modern day. That is kind of like rugby-like tactics in the Premier League that we saw last week as well, Phil. And it is absolutely terrible to see, but it is
Same
where we are.
tactics at youth level is insane to me. Here's a 10-year-old, you playing a double pivot, you hold overlapping foot. What are you talking about? These kids, just let these kids play.
Yeah.
Football is not theoretical. Maths is theoretical. I don't know how to give anyone a verbal instruction on how to trap a ball. I just don't know. That has to come from repetition, osmosis, and it has to come away from coaches in a critiqued environment, right? It has to where a kid has to be encouraged to make a mistake because it's the only way they learn. Ronaldo, Michael Jordan, all that, they had to be comfortable making mistakes. And what we get, sorry to be loquacious on this, but what we get, if you remember being at school, 9, 10 years of age, teacher asked you a question and you got it wrong in front of the whole class. Everyone remembers the embarrassment, right? Everyone remembers how they felt at that moment. And the next time the teacher asked the question, even if they said 2 + 2, you were, don't be asking me, I'm hiding, whatever you do, don't come near me. It's exactly the same thing that happens to a kid on the field when they make a mistake and you've got a parents on the sideline and what the fuck are you doing, Johnny? Launch a ball. What do you think happens to that kid the next time they get the ball? They don't shoot for the ball because they aren't confident. They don't want the ball. And boom, launch it. I'm not making a mistake. Or we get coaches do 2 laps. Imagine telling Tiger Woods he has to do 2 laps of Augusta for missing a putt. What the fuck are you doing? Like, when does the coach do 2 laps? Like this idea that suffering leads to development, uncomfortable experiences leads to mental resilience. Absolute bullshit. Do we need to see how many veterans are blowing their head off every day? Like, this is just nonsense. So to me, so much of coaching is about nurturing a person. You need a wall on a football to learn first touch. Right? You don't need a $3,000 a season coach. And so this to me is the problem.
Yeah, well, I was wondering how long we were going to
Sorry.
tell you absolutely
There's a
explode.
personal issue with coaching here.
No, look, I was involved training my son's teams years ago, and the fundamental approach we had all the way through kiddies, the whole ways up, was just to make sure that they retained their interest in the game. You just want kids going out having fun and wanting to come back next season. And from that, then, you can start fine-tuning technical attributes as they get that little bit older. And as I said to you last week, it's something that I'm standing by now with this particular team under Michael Carrick. It looks like a group of professional footballers that have been told to play the basics and just allow everything else to come out thereafter. And as long as we continue to see 3 points coming through as the end result every single week, Phil, we're not going to have too many complaints. And I think that's probably a pretty fitting place to end this on what is our first live videoed conversation. So I'll leave it to you, Phil. What would you like to say in ending?
Yeah, thanks to all of you for all the feedback so far. Obviously, this podcast will get refined, and we're very open to listener feedback, positive or negative. We know things will not be perfect, so we appreciate the feedback. We appreciate people listening. Some of the comments I've had over the last week have just been mind-boggling to me. Appreciate every single one of you. Thank you for that. And look, if you have any feedback for us, just please get in touch.
Absolutely. I mirror all that, and I look forward to gaining a whole new set of supporters, audience and whatnot, and growing with Phil here. So hope you enjoyed it, and we will talk to you guys soon.